Welcome into the final edition of the Sports Edge podcast for the 2024 season. I'm your host, Commissioner Dan Stanzik, joined by two-time champ Justin the Guru Eisner. Guru, can't believe we're here. We made it, 2025, and the unthinkable has happened. Hath has finally claimed the title. How should we feel about this, especially considering the fact that he did beat Steve in the final?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this being sort of worst case scenario at the beginning of the playoffs, right? We said a Hath-Steve matchup would be our nightmare. It came true. And I think we narrowly escaped the worst possible outcome, which was Steve running the table. So congrats to Hath. We'll talk about the kind of weird circumstances that led to this, but glad it wasn't Steve.
I feel like we may have alluded when we had the question earlier in the season, and shame on me for not going back and checking. We had a question of like funniest outcomes for like what could happen to Steve. I
Yeah.
think this might have been one. Like Hathaway runs the table and beats in the final. I think you might have offered that.
I think this was like one of my first ones on that list was
Yeah.
Hath sneaks in and beats Steve in the final.
Yeah, pretty good. All right, well, we have plenty to get to tonight, including every team's season summed up in 3 words or less. But first, a word from our sponsor. What if I told you that sometimes windows stay open even after they've been slammed shut? That an 0-3 start was alarming. That a 2-point win in week 4 would save their season. That they wouldn't know it until after they gave up internally. That losses in week 5, week 6, and week 7 seemingly sealed their fate. That after week 6, they'd start making moves for the future. That they'd trade DK Metcalf, Travis Etienne, and Tony Pollard to the Commish for Javonte Williams and 2 guys who ended up on the season-ending IR. That they were already focused on landing a top 3 pick in next year's draft. That the sun god's disciples were cooked. And that Hath was the doubting Thomas. That won't be my last biblical reference. That I went to Catholic school. That Hath told me via text in October that he was punting on the season. That he was, quote, throwing up his hands after trying to pull every lever to make the season viable. That the one lever he hadn't pulled was discussed thoroughly on this podcast. That the biggest proponent of this lever was tied with him at the bottom of the standings. That he had nothing else to lose. So he started 2 tight ends. That Evan Ingram and Tucker Kraft both caught touchdowns, and he won. That he'd implement this strategy 3 more times in a row and win every time. That he was the only manager in the entire league to go undefeated with multiple tight ends in their lineup. That it wasn't the only miracle that went their way this season. That they wouldn't even have made the playoffs if not for a Cowboys special teamer touching a blocked punt past the line of scrimmage late in the 4th quarter on Monday Night Football in Week 14. That sentence was long. That so is this fake ad for a fake 30 for 30. That they'd sneak into the playoffs by just 2 points. that Robbie was murdered. That they'd beat the number 3, number 2, and number 1 seeds in back-to-back-to-back weeks to win the title. That none of those teams would score 102 points. That it was the easiest path in the history of the league. That we should have known that they'd win when Steve was the last line of defense. That their best postseason player, aside from Burrow, was Ladd McConkey. That even in a championship season, they still didn't beat Zans. That Jaylen Warren has only scored 10 or more fantasy points in 3 games this season. That 2 of those games were the semis and the finals. That the championship curse has been broken. That the McConkey is off his back. That no one would have liked that joke more than Bill Dwyer. That Hath now has as many titles as Steve and Glancy. That the only manager in the league without a title is now Kess. That Marshawn is no longer their linchpin. That somewhere, Olivia Culpo is smiling. And Matthew Stafford is eating a taco salad. That after 3 seasons of heartbreak, Hath has risen from the dead. That he is the Samson of the Sports Edge. That his exquisite head of hair is finally fit for a crown. But that doesn't give him the right to spam our text thread with Michigan propaganda. ESPN Films presents The Ice Cat Cometh, a 30 for 30 about an unlikely road to redemption for a team that probably should have won it all in each of the past 3 seasons and probably shouldn't have even earned a playoff berth this season. All right, Guru, let's dive right in. As you know, I was with Steve and another former league champ on Sunday for lunch at the Colony Grill in Fairfield. Steve was already downtrodden after the monster game by Joe Burrow on Saturday, but he was toiling with some roster decisions. 3 guys for 2 spots: Jordan Addison, Josh Downs, Isaac Guerendo. He went with Addison and Downs. Wouldn't have mattered, but he obviously should have gone with Guerendo instead of Downs. But when you look at Steve's decisions in totality, where, if anywhere, do you think he erred?
I don't like to miss chances to give Steve a hard time. As you know, we know this podcast, we like to do that. I, I kind of feel like it's hard to fault these picks. I don't know how you pick Garendo going against the Lions, top 5 against the running back over anybody playing the Giants at any point in 2025, 24. So yeah, I don't fault him. I don't think he went wrong. I think this was just one of those weeks.
So Hoban pointed this one out in the text chain, but benching Marvin Harrison Jr. and choosing Josh Downs over him, kind of a head scratcher. When you dive in, it makes more sense. Harrison Jr. had 3 straight single-digit performances heading into championship weekend, but he's still your number 1 overall pick. He's still like, well, this is gonna come up later. Like, you kind of got to go with the guys that got you there. And I don't think Josh Downs was the guy that got Steve there. I understand he's facing the matchup, facing the Giants, good matchup. He has Joe Flacco at quarterback. He can actually throw the ball instead of Anthony Richardson, something we've covered on this podcast before.
Yeah.
But Marvin Harrison Jr., leaving him on the bench, a bit of a head scratcher for me. Again, not that it would have mattered. Steve's performance was so porous that it wouldn't have ended up mattering that much. But great season for Steve, but kind of ended in the worst possible outcome for him, laying a total egg in the final half. On the other hand, it is just like insane that he went from 1-6 and made the playoffs, and then on top of that, he ran the table and won the title. He becomes the third manager to win the league as the sixth seed. Zans and Pete had previously pulled it off. But is this story, this incredible story, six seed to the title, 1-6 to the title, is it diminished at all for you, considering the Charmin soft path he faced on the way to the title? Meaning you scored 80 points, Walsh could barely muster 97, and Steve needed a heroic Jaden Daniels performance to even crack 100.
I mean, maybe a little. It felt like as this was happening, and we talked about this a couple times. I mentioned it, like it felt like a Team of Destiny situation where, and I also mentioned that it seemed like this felt like the kind of situation half needed was like barely get in, no pressure. You see this all the time in
You're right.
sports. It's not the team that was the best team all year, like Steve, and then he has all the pressure to win. It's like half snuck in. If he wins, great. If he doesn't, whatever. I just think this is what he needed to win. He needed to have this kind of thing happen. He's sort of accomplished all the other things in this league. So, I mean, was it Charmin soft, as you put it? 100%. I mean, it was a pathetic performances against him over and over again. But I don't know that it diminishes it. I think this was a long time coming.
I think that's one of the best points you've made all year. Very astute of you. Like it was a pressure off, playing with house money situation for Hath, and he definitely needed that. I don't think it's diminished at all. He went from 1-6 to the title. That's an all-time feat. I thought Pete had gone 0-6 and won the title. Pete went 0-6 and made the playoffs, but did not win the title. So 1-6 to the title is the craziest performance, craziest turnaround in season that we've ever seen. Congrats to Hath, but at the same time, shame on you, shame on Walsh, shame on Steve for
Definitely.
letting Hath cakewalk his way to the Champions Club. No pod the week of Christmas. So let's touch on the semifinal matchups quickly before we get on with other things here. Steve beat Zans by 21. Story of that matchup, however, was the concussion by Jalen Hurts that knocked him out of the game in the first quarter. Of course, we cannot assume that Hurts would have scored 21 more points. He did have 4 points in his limited action, but he had scored 25 plus in each of the past 2 weeks, and he did average 24 points per game, and that includes this 4 point outing. So technically, if you take that out, he would have averaged 25 or more per game. I know we've gone back and forth on this topic, the worst feelings in fantasy football, but I think this one has to rate right up there by the top, does it not?
Yeah, I mean, considering the circumstances of it being a playoff game and it probably swinging the matchup, like you said, I think we can feel pretty confident he scores, 21 more points. So yeah, I mean, I still think that the kneeling thing is out of control. Like that just feels awful. Like that shouldn't count. I was also thinking, by the way, thank God we got rid of kickers and defenses, but
Oh my
I don't know
God.
if you're watching that game. I was kind of watching closely. We don't talk about other leagues, but I needed Kittle to not score some points for another league. And the kicker on San Francisco missed that last extra point.
Moody, yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking, like, I wonder if that swung some matchups. Could you imagine
Yeah.
your kicker missing an extra point and then losing for the negative point? So that could be bad too. But the kneeing, because it's like a victory thing and nothing, like at least the injury, like somebody hit your guy and he got hurt, like that's a part of football. Kneeling feels very ridiculous. But considering the circumstances, having somebody get injured, missing an extra point, doing something like this in a playoff game is way up there, way up
I
there.
agree. Totally agree. I mean, the Josh Allen kneel downs that happened to Pete, losing by a tenth of a point, that was brutal.
Yeah.
Had that happened in the championship round, I probably would never play fantasy football again. But what happened to Zans is such a gut punch. Like you put in work all year to give yourself an opportunity to win the title. You just want to get in, see what happens, and he did that. He put his team in a great chance to win. And having that chance effectively eliminated because an independent neurologist thought that a guy looked woozy is kind of insane.
Yeah.
Um,
Especially like when it happens mid-game, like if you think about it, he also had Baker Mayfield. So if
right.
for whatever reason your guy was hurt and just didn't start, he could have fixed his lineup. But it's like, what do you
Yeah.
do? You play Hurts. Like it's just that just sucks.
The part that sucked, as again, we don't talk about other leagues, but I also am a Jalen Hurts guy, and that situation happened to me in a semifinal matchup that I lost. But Hurts had his helmet back on and was ready to go back in the game on a third and goal, and they stopped him again. And then he didn't play again the following week. Like something doesn't add up there. But
Yeah.
say what you will, I do know one thing: Zans would not have gift wrapped half the title like Steve did. And in the other semifinal, Walsh needed 20 points from Jordan Love and Christian Watson on Monday night to chase down Hath in one of the more forgettable playoff matchups of all time. Hath was sending me angry texts about CeeDee Lamb's usage on Sunday night. He had resigned himself to defeat. But Walsh's Packers only scored 16 points combined, and the Sun God's disciples moved on. Walsh got nearly 50 points from his running back duo of James Cook and Bijan Robinson, still couldn't score 100 points. He benched Calvin Ridley and Jameson Williams, both of whom he started in his regular season finale, for the aforementioned Christian Watson and the 49ers' fifth string running back, Patrick Taylor Jr. Watson and Taylor combined for 5 total points. Ridley and JMO scored 39. Was this the biggest boneheaded decision of the entire playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, this was a head scratcher for me. You asked about Steve earlier, and I sheepishly defended his moves and said I think that was probably an okay decision. These feel hard to defend from Walsh. You said this earlier, and as you know, this is a professional podcast. We have notes. I'm looking at my notes. I literally wrote down "dance with who brought you." You said it earlier. I
Told it was
wrote
going to come up again. Yep.
yeah, I mean, and this feels like the classic situation of that. Like, I don't understand how we play him there. This feels like the Hathaway break. Like my team was doing what they did all year.
Yeah, yeah.
Idiot. Like throwing up an 80 in the playoffs, that was not all that surprising from
And
my
Steve had a bad week. Totally get
right,
it. But Hath had a bad week. Hath barely scored over 100 that week.
right, right. This was the moment where
Yeah.
Hath should have got knocked out. We should have made better decisions here. Dance with who brought you, and Hath is out. I think this was the one that was a head scratcher for me.
Yeah. I think both decisions were flawed. But as I dug deeper into the lineup decisions for Walsh, he also would have won the matchup had he not opted for Brenton Strange at tight end over Jake Ferguson. And I understand
Oh
Strange had
yeah.
11 catches in week 15. Evan Ingram's out for the year. I understand the thought process, but if he sticks with any of his three guys, he moves on and he likely beats Steve in the title game. So that's three of his guys he opted against in the semifinals. All three burned him. Had he chosen to stick with one of them, he moves on, faces Steve in the title game. Brutal, brutal, brutal for Walsh. Final segment of the season. You ready for
Oh,
this?
I am. I am. I got some good ones, I think.
I asked you to do some homework as I normally do. I wanted you, this is an old Colin Cowherd trick where most of my radio hacky ideas come from. He used to do this ahead of the NBA season. He would sum up each NBA team in 3 words or less. So we're kind of doing the reverse. I wanted you to sum up how the season went for all 10 teams in 3 words or less. I also did the exercise myself. I'll let you go first. We will go in the order in which the teams finished. So we'll start with half.
Yeah, so we kind of alluded to this one. I went with the stars aligned. I think that was sort of
Good.
the sum up of half the season. We talked about it. Kind of the path to the title was easy. The 1-6 start and just started humming off wins and gets in there on that last week. So the stars aligned. That's my half season sum up.
Yeah, mine was similar. I did finally a champion, and I chose that instead of monkey off back. Like it's
Yeah.
everyone knows the situation Hath was in. He had the best team the past 3 years. He blew it each of those 3 seasons. Probably didn't deserve to get in the playoffs this season. We all know that story with Robbie, et cetera, et cetera. Gets in, things break his way. Good for Hath, happy for him. Finally a champion. I'm sure he's thrilled. Steve, 3 words or less.
Yeah, well, it's the last time we talked to Steve, he was talking about his big golf trip. So I went with a little golf saying here. I went with birdie putt short.
Ooh, I
That's
thought there
the
was going to
birdie
be a
putt
bogey in
short.
there, but look at you.
Yeah, birdie putt short. Can't
Left
give
the
a
birdie
bogey.
putt
I mean, he
short.
had such a good season. It felt like maybe that, it's just, but he had that chance and he left it, came up short.
Mine again similar. I have title game choke. All things considered, great season for Steve, regular season champions. He went from worst to first, but his team, I mean, again, his decisions really couldn't have swung things. His team just melted when it mattered most. He got to the end line and just couldn't win. He the runner up, the regular season champion, like he made money. Best season Steve's had in a long time, but couldn't seal the deal. Walsh, this
Yeah.
this one. I'm interested to see what you got for Walsh here.
Yeah. So
Bryce,
I
tough one, man.
wanted, I moved, so I wanted to do something about Dance with Who Brought You Here. I moved it into my notes because it was too long and I couldn't figure out how to
Yeah.
shorten it. So, but on the same note, I went, got too cute.
Yeah.
Got too cute. That's what I think we sum up the season with Walsh there at the end.
We are in lockstep once again. I went for overthought the room.
Mm,
much in the way that Pete Carroll and Darrell Bevell overthought the room in the closing moments of Super Bowl 49. Everyone remembers that one, Seahawks Patriots. Walsh didn't ride with the guys that got him there and was burned for it in an ugly semifinal loss to Hath. Finishing second in the regular season is no small feat, but you do not get any reward for it. Walsh got the closest you could get to getting some financial compensation and not getting it. Lost out on the one seed, the regular season championship, the last week of the season. Lost out on getting to the title game by 5 points, three terrible decisions. Just brutal for Walsh. Great season, but he got nothing for it. Overthought the room when
uh,
it mattered most. Zans,
one
be
other thing
nice to
on
Zans.
Walsh there, just real quick,
Oh,
is
sure.
I've been an advocate of this for a while, and I'm glad I'm not in the situation, so it seems not biased. But I think that we should be awarding way more for coming in second in the regular season than coming in second in the playoffs.
Interesting.
I think the playoffs, you can either, you could potentially win, two fluky games. You're in the final. I think it is a much better achievement to have come in second place throughout the year than it is to come in to be a finalist in the playoffs. So I've long been an advocate for that one rule change or a slight switch of where the money gets distributed. But to your point, with the way it stands today, tough one for Walsh. Tough
We're
one.
gonna we're gonna have to bring that one up with the rules committee. I do agree with you that the regular season, uh, for example, the regular season champion gets significantly more money than the playoff runner-up because it is
Right.
way more difficult to win the regular season than it
Agreed.
is, to your point, to get to the finals and
Agreed.
lose.
I'm with that.
We are on Zans, and I advise you to be nice. Three words or less. Zans, what
Okay.
do you got?
Three words or less. Follow the words here, and maybe you'll pick up what I went with. But I went with crazy, tragic ending
Ooh,
because those letters are
ooh,
CT.
CTE. Oh, that's rough. Oh
Yeah.
man,
Crazy, tragic ending. CTE. It felt right. I felt like,
wow.
how could you say anything we talked about earlier? One of the worst ways to go out. And with the concussion, that's what I went with.
I went with peaked too early. Zans ended the season, four straight losses, had to play in the quarterfinal round, and then the Hurts headache screwed him. It is going to be interesting. You mentioned Baker Mayfield early. It's going to be interesting to see what he does with Mayfield in the offseason.
Yeah.
Like, is it worth it keeping two quarterbacks in this league? Some guys have done it. I don't know if it's necessarily paid off. Will he try to trade one of them? Who knows? But that is something to keep your eyes on. What about for your team here, Guru? Three words or less. What do you got?
Yeah, I had to cut this saying down to three words. Hopefully, it'll resonate. But I went with water found level. Right? They say water always finds its level, and I think that's sort of what happened. This team was flawed from day one. We've talked about that, and eventually, it caught up with us with that just miserable playoff performance. So water found level.
You're good at this game. I like that. That's a great saying. I went with Bucky and Lucky. Bucky Irving, the breakout
I like
star of
that.
your team and perhaps this podcast. And you are also someone that earned the three seed despite finishing less than half a point ahead of the ninth place team in scoring. So Bucky and Lucky.
I like that.
What do you have for Pete Allen's team? Three words or less.
Yeah, this is maybe a little bit looking forward for Pete. I put windows still open.
It's
Uh,
good.
Yeah, I think he's still like I looked at the team and I'm like, this is a really good team. There's a lot of really good pieces, and I'll talk about this a little bit on with your team as well. But I went window still open. We got a lot of talent here. It's a tough way to go out, but we're okay. We're okay.
I went with, and I'm going to read this the way I wrote it. There's a question mark here. Uncle Josh Curse.
Nope.
Pete came into the league in 2011. He won three titles his first 8 seasons. Somehow he acquires the best quarterback in the league for the past 5 seasons, and all of a sudden he can't win anymore. I don't understand what's going on.
Interesting.
Not to mention the fact that he had Saquon Barkley, who rushed for, wait a minute, 2,000 yards this season. George Kittle, a monster season, and Pete somehow can't figure it out in the playoffs. I don't know what's going on there. So I went with Uncle Josh Curse question mark. This one might hurt some people. What do you have for Robbie?
I went paging Dr. Health on Robbie. I just feel like I looked through and I'm like, you know what? Some tough injuries for Robbie this year that could have maybe changed the complexion of the year. Rice, Diggs, Kamara was out a little bit at the end. Cooper had a couple stints there. Gabe Davis never really turned anything, but he was on the IR. So a lot of injuries for Robbie. It was a really weird season. I think this could have been another peak too early from your
Yeah.
one you used earlier, but yeah, I went just down the health route. A lot of injuries here.
Yeah, I went for the low hanging fruit here. I went with is he breathing? kind of what you mentioned. Started 3-1, had perhaps the best guest appearance on the podcast all season. Terrible the way things ended for him in week 14, not making the playoffs. Hadn't made the playoffs since he won the title in 2020. So it was a tough one for him the way the regular season ended, and kind of feel for him. What do you have for the Stanzics?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I went with throw it out. Throw it
Oh,
out, which is my way of saying I wouldn't worry about it. Again, a lot of talent here. Don't panic. Weird season, barely missed the playoffs. Throw it out. I think the nucleus is here, and I wouldn't do anything crazy.
I like it. That's good. I went with total nosedive. Mahomes has been a disaster since we acquired him. Kelsey did not let it up like we thought he would. Back-to-back losses to end the year knocked us out of the playoffs for the first time since 2020. Couldn't have ended much worse than it did. Was in position all year to make the playoffs. Just felt like the team was going to come together. McCaffrey comes back, isn't really McCaffrey. Then he gets hurt again, and then kind of the wheels really fell off. Guys are getting older though. I like your advice here, but we'll see what kind of changes happen in the offseason if they're just cosmetic on the outside, or if some major changes are in store. What do you have for Kess?
All right, I went down the medical route here. I went with breakthrough or placebo
Ooh,
for Cass. And what I mean here is if you look at the ending of his season, we had a nice little streak going. So
the
from
monster performances.
yeah,
Yeah,
week
144,
yeah,
140, 163 to end it.
yeah. And if you go back a little further, 136, 105 kind of had a blip 81. Then
Yep.
121, 144, 140, 163. Was there really a corner turning or is it a placebo effect? Is it just
Yeah.
that he happened to go on a run or is there something here? So I think that's the season wrap up for me on Cass. Is this a medical breakthrough or are we seeing a placebo here?
That is 136 lost by 3.
Yeah.
121 lost by 19. 163 lost by 23. That's tough for Kess. But yeah, I went for one step back, meaning, one step back, two steps forward kind of
Yeah,
deal.
two-step
So
forward.
they snuck into the playoffs in 22 and 23, Kess's first two seasons back in the league. Despite finishing ninth, I think they are much more formidable now than either of those playoff teams were. Their foundation of Brian Thomas Jr., Puka Nacua, and Devon Achane, hard to get much better than that. So I think you and I are kind of in agreement on the doc. Looks like he is poised for a breakthrough. Finally,
Yeah,
Hoban.
our boy.
3 words or less. What do you got?
Went with the tight end tank. Tight end tank. He tanked the season. He went with all the tight ends early. Here's what's interesting though. I don't know if you looked into this. I was thinking about maybe doing something around luck with Hoban. Do you know that Hoban lost the most games this year while scoring over 100 points?
I did not.
He lost 7 games this year when he scored 100 points or more. The next closest, Zans and Robbie both lost 5. But
Wow.
7 different times, Hoban scored 100 or more points and lost. So there's maybe a little bit of luck there. I know that in this league, like 100 points isn't that big of a deal. Like you should be getting 120, 130 before
Yeah.
you're upset that you lost. But it was interesting when I looked, those guys were 5. There was like maybe one other team that was 4, and everybody else was 3 or below. So it does still seem to follow the trend that if you score 100, you usually win.
Yeah.
But I couldn't resist the tight end tank.
That's crazy. Yeah, he scored 141 and lost, 133 and lost. That's
Yeah,
tough for Hoban. I went for Bowers and one, meaning this season Brock Bowers breakout star, and he has the number one pick in next year's draft. I'm not sure if anyone outside of Half had a better season for their franchise than Hoban did. Maybe Steve. Steve had a good season,
yeah,
but Hoban got the cornerstone player, as I mentioned too, in Bowers. Has got the number one pick of the draft. Also has the number 8 pick in the draft, thanks to a trade he made with Walsh. And as long as he doesn't trade them both for Jalen Waddle, he has a chance to set himself up for future success. Bowers and one for
yeah.
Hoban. Guru, that's going to do it for us. Thank you as
Did
always.
it.
Tremendous work this
We
season.
did it. We made it to the end. No more complaints. I look forward to not having to read our emails next start of the next
We'll
season.
put the
So
intern on it.
yeah, great stuff.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Thank you all for watching, and good luck to all of you in the offseason. In our pre-show meeting, we should point this out. There are no rules. There is just a trade
Yeah.
deadline. The season is now over. The tampering phase is you're free to make trades, I guess. Normally, you don't get much action in this league until about August, until I send that email, and then people start wheeling and dealing. But technically, you could make a trade right now if you wanted to. So feel free. Good luck in the offseason. Congrats again to Half. Welcome to the Champions Club. And as I mentioned, good luck to all of you in the offseason.